The attorney smiled. It was the kind of smile that wasn't meant to convey happiness. It was a tool, like the polished mahogany table between them, or the leather-bound blotter that held no ink. It was meant to signal the end of a process, the smooth, inevitable conclusion of a matter that had already been decided. He slid a sheaf of papers across the table. The top page was a summary, bold letters declaring a balance due, $44,317.12. The precision was part of the performance. It suggested unimpeachable accuracy. It suggested there was no room for debate. The man on the other side of the table did not look at the papers. His name was James Croft. His hands, resting on his knees, were weathered in a way the attorney's hands would never be. They were clean, but the lines were etched deep with work and weather. Maps of a life spent outdoors. He wore a simple button-down shirt, tucked into worn but sturdy trousers. His work boots were clean, but not new. He looked like a man who had come directly from a job he respected to attend a meeting he did not. He didn't reach for the papers. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. His gaze was fixed on the attorney, a man half his age, with a suit worth more than the truck James had driven to get here. He waited for the smile to fade. When it did, replaced by a flicker of professional impatience, James moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. He reached into the inside pocket of his canvas coat. He did not pull out a wallet. He did not pull out a checkbook. He brought out a single piece of paper folded into a neat, small rectangle. It was yellowed with age, the creases worn soft as cloth. He placed it on the table. He did not slide it, he placed it. It sat in the center of the vast, polished space, a small island of history in an ocean of modern finance. The attorney looked at the folded paper. He looked back at James Croft. "Tell him we are past that point." The branch manager, a nervous man named Peterson, who had been silent for 20 minutes, shifted in his chair. The leather creaked. It was the only sound. James said nothing. He simply unfolded the paper. One crease, then another. The paper had the consistency of old linen. On its face was a letterhead of a bank that no longer existed, the People's Trust of Monroe County. And below the typed lines detailing a final loan payment, there was a stamp, a deep violet blue stamp, pressed into the paper with force. The ink had bled slightly into the fibers over the decades. It formed two words, paid in full. And below that, a date, October 12th, 1972. The room was designed to be reassuring. That was the modern theory of banking. Soft grays, brushed steel accents, a single piece of abstract art on the wall that was colorful but not challenging. It was a room that promised reasonableness, a place where solutions were found. The man from the corporate office, the attorney, embodied this philosophy. His name was Davies. He had introduced himself with a firm handshake and that same professional smile. He was the picture of confidence. His suit was tailored, his shoes reflected the recessed lighting, his watch was a quiet statement of success. He represented Consolidated Regional Bank, an entity that had swallowed the People's Trust of Monroe County in a series of acquisitions and mergers so complex that no one in the room, except perhaps James Croft, remembered the original name. To Davies, the history was irrelevant. All that mattered was the data. And the data, on his tablet and in the thick folder before him, was unequivocal. Loan account 774-B, originated in 1952 for the purchase of a 40-acre parcel, showed a long period of dormancy followed by a reactivation. The original note, he explained, had a balloon clause that was never satisfied. Interest had accrued. Penalties were applied. The number was the number, $44,000. He spoke with a calm, practiced patience, the tone of a man explaining a difficult but necessary truth to a child. He was not unkind. He was simply correct. On his left sat Peterson, the branch manager, He was a local man, or local enough. He had managed this branch for 6 years. He knew of the Croft family. He knew their farm was one of the oldest in the county. He looked uncomfortable. He kept his hands folded on the table, his eyes darting from Davies's confident face to James's impassive one. He was caught between a corporate directive from a city 3 hours away and the quiet, stubborn reality of the man sitting opposite him. He had hoped this meeting would be a formality, a simple presentation of the facts, a discussion of payment options, a resolution. He was beginning to understand. It would be none of those things. James Croft was the anomaly in the room. He was a man of the soil in a chamber of sterilized air. He had not spoken more than 10 words since sitting down. He had listened. He had watched. Some men collect problems. He collected patience. He had brought no lawyer, no accountant. He had brought the folded paper and a cardboard tube that now leaned against his chair. Davies saw him as a relic, a simple farmer overwhelmed by modern finance, a man to be managed with a firm but gentle hand. He assumed the folded paper was a desperate, meaningless gesture, a piece of old memorabilia. He had seen it before. People clutching at straws, bringing in old letters, faded bank books, anything to deny the hard numbers on the screen in front of them. It was a sad, predictable part of the process. He would be patient. He would explain the legal standing of the bank's official audited records. He would gently set aside the yellowed paper and return to the reality of the debt. It was a simple, clean procedure. To understand the piece of paper, you have to go back, not to 1972, just 3 weeks earlier. James Croft was in his barn, sharpening the blade of a brush hog. It was a rhythmic, meditative task. The scrape of the file against the steel, the smell of oil and dust, the cool autumn air coming through the open doors. His wife Mary came walking down the path from the house. She was holding a single piece of mail. She never brought him the mail unless it looked important. This one did. It was a thick envelope with the formal return address of Consolidated Regional Bank's legal department. He wiped his hands on a rag. He took the letter. He slit it open with the corner of the file. The language inside was dense, full of legal terms and account numbers, but the message was clear. A debt was owed, a very old debt. They were demanding payment. Failure to remit would result in foreclosure proceedings against his property. The property his father had bought. The property he was born on. He read it twice. He felt no anger, no panic. He felt a deep, quiet confusion. It was the feeling of looking at a map where your own house has been erased. A mistake. That was his first thought, a simple, clerical mistake. Someone, somewhere, had mixed up account numbers. He had never had a loan with this bank. His father had taught him to pay cash, to owe no man. The farm had been free and clear for as long as he could remember. That night, after dinner, he went up to the attic. It was cold, the air still and smelling of old wood and stored memories. In the corner, under a canvas tarp, were his father's things, 2 steamer trunks and a grey metal strongbox. John Croft had not been a sentimental man, but he was a meticulous one. He kept everything that mattered. James lifted the lid of the box. It wasn't locked. His father had said the best lock was obscurity. Inside were deeds, titles, tax statements, birth certificates, all in neatly labelled manila folders. He found the one marked Parcel B, 40 acres. Inside were the original purchase documents from 1952, the survey map, the title insurance, and tucked into a small envelope at the back, he found it. The receipt. He had seen it before, years ago, when his father had shown it to him. "You keep this," John had said, his voice serious. "You don't ever lose it. A man's word is good. A bank's stamp is better."
This says the land is ours, not theirs, not ever again. James had been a teenager then, more interested in cars and baseball than in old papers. But he remembered the weight his father gave that moment, the way he held the receipt as if it were the deed itself. James took the paper downstairs. He sat at the kitchen table, the one his father had built, and looked at the violet stamp. Paid in full. It was not a mistake. It was an erasure. The bank had forgotten. The paper remembered. He knew then that a phone call would not fix this. A letter would not be enough.
The new world of digital records and corporate mergers had no memory. It had only data, and the data was wrong. He would have to go there himself. He would have to place the paper on their table. He would have to make them remember. His father, John Croft, was the kind of man who understood the power of a document. He was a farmer, but he read contracts with the care of a lawyer. He believed that the world ran on paper, and that if your paper was right, you were right. He had fought in the war, and it had taught him that institutions could make terrible mistakes. An order could be lost. A name could be struck from a list. A man could be forgotten. He brought that caution home with him. He applied it to everything, especially to debt. In 1952, he and his wife Sarah bought the 40 acres next to the original family homestead. It was good land, but it needed work. They took a 20-year loan from the People's Trust of Monroe County. It was the biggest debt they had ever taken on. For 2 decades, John made the payments. Every month the check was mailed. Every year he asked for a summary statement. He kept them all, filed in order. In the autumn of 1972, he was ready to make the final payment. James was 16 at the time. His father took him along. He said it was something a boy needed to see. The bank back then was a different kind of place. It was in a stone building on the town square. It had marble floors and a high ceiling. The teller cages were ornate brass. It smelled of old money and floor polish. The bank president, a man named Mr. Abernathy, knew John by name. They sat in his office, which had a view of the courthouse. John didn't just hand over a check. He had the final payment in cash. He counted it out on the desk. He had the loan documents with him. He had his entire file of payment statements. He asked Mr. Abernathy to verify the final amount, including the last month's interest. They went over the numbers together. Once they agreed, John pushed the cash across the desk, and then he waited. Mr. Abernathy started to write out a standard counter receipt. John stopped him. "I'll need more than that, Arthur," he said. His tone was polite but firm. "I need a letter of satisfaction on your letterhead stating the loan is paid in full, and I need you to stamp it with the bank's official paid in full stamp. And I need you to sign it." Mr. Abernathy had paused. It was an unusual request. Not the letter, but the insistence on the specific stamp. Most people just took the counterslip and were happy. "And," John continued, "I'll need you to file a lien release with the county clerk tomorrow morning, and mail me a copy of their stamped filing receipt." James watched the exchange. He saw the flicker of surprise in the banker's eyes, followed by a slow nod of respect. Mr. Abernathy understood. This was not about mistrust. It was about completion. It was about closing a circle that had been open for 20 years. A secretary typed up the letter. Mr. Abernathy unlocked a drawer and took out a heavy rubber stamp and a violet ink pad. He pressed the stamp firmly onto the ink, then onto the bottom of the letter. The thud of the stamp echoed in the quiet office. He signed his name below it. He handed the paper to John Croft. John folded it carefully and put it in his coat pocket. "One more thing, Arthur," he said. "Make a copy of that for your own files." As they walked out into the October afternoon, John put his hand on James's shoulder. "You see that? You finish things. You finish them all the way. You leave no loose ends. You get the paper because the paper doesn't forget."
That lesson, delivered on a crisp autumn day almost 50 years ago, was the reason James Croft was sitting in a sterile conference room watching a young attorney who believed the world began and ended on a computer screen. James let the silence stretch.
He watched Davies, the attorney, who was now looking at the old receipt with a professional curiosity, as if it were a fossil. He picked it up. The paper was delicate in his manicured fingers. He read the words. He noted the signature. He tapped the violet stamp. "Mr. Croft," he began, his voice regaining its smooth, explanatory tone. "I understand why you would bring this. I do. It's an interesting piece of your family's history. But you have to understand, from a legal and procedural standpoint, this document is superseded by the official records of the bank." He placed the receipt back on the table, setting it apart from his own stack of papers. He was creating a visual separation between history and fact. "Our records, which are audited and maintained digitally, are the legally recognized account of this loan. In the 90s, all active and dormant accounts from the People's Trust were migrated to our new system during the acquisition. This account was flagged as having an outstanding balance on a balloon clause. That is the record we must act on." He leaned forward slightly, adopting a more conspiratorial man-to-man tone. "Frankly, what this paper suggests is that there was likely an error made back in 1972. The payment was received, but perhaps it was misapplied, or the lien was never properly extinguished in the bank's internal accounting. It's unfortunate, but the legal reality is that the official record stands until a court orders it changed." He sat back, satisfied. He had provided a logical, legally sound explanation. He had validated the man's feelings while gently invalidating his evidence. It was a standard de-escalation tactic. James Croft did not look de-escalated. He looked unchanged. His gaze had not wavered. When Davies finished, James spoke. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "The record is wrong." It was not an argument. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty as a man stating his own name. Davies's smile tightened at the edges. The simplicity of the man was becoming frustrating. He was supposed to be intimidated. He was supposed to start talking about getting a lawyer, about payment plans. He was not supposed to just sit there and state the impossible. "With all due respect, sir, you are not in a position to make that determination. The bank is. And the bank's position is that the record is correct." The finality in his voice was meant to close the conversation. James Croft spoke again. "The bank is wrong." No anger, no emotion, just the quiet repetition. No words, no hesitation, a pause. The branch manager, Peterson, cleared his throat. He looked at Davies, then at Croft. He could feel the temperature in the room dropping. The corporate playbook was failing. The simple farmer was refusing to read his lines. He was just sitting there, a quiet granite boulder in the middle of their smooth corporate highway. The old piece of paper sat between them. It seemed to have more weight than all the printed spreadsheets in Davies's folder. Davies shifted his strategy. The direct dismissal of the evidence had failed. He would try a procedural angle. He picked up the receipt again, this time holding it by the very edge, as if it might disintegrate. "Okay, let's entertain this for a moment," he said, the condescension barely veiled. "Let's assume this document is authentic. For a loan of this type, secured by real property, a simple receipt isn't enough to clear the title. The bank would have been required to file a satisfaction of mortgage or a deed of release with the county recorder's office. Without that recorded filing, the lien remains attached to the property. It's a cloud on the title. We have searched the county records. There is no such filing on record.
He placed the receipt down. Checkmate.
This was a point of law, not of memory. It was a matter of public record.
He had done his homework. He had had a paralegal search the digital county archives twice. He was certain. He had cornered the old man in a place where sentimentality had no currency. James Croft's expression did not change. He reached into his coat pocket again. This time he pulled out a much smaller piece of paper. It was a thin, almost translucent slip of onion skin paper, the kind used for carbon copies in an age before photocopiers. It was a receipt from the Monroe County Clerk's office. It had a faint but legible stamp showing the date, October 13th, 1972, and a notation, received for filing, lien release, loan 774-B, J. Croft. At the bottom was a small, spidery signature, D. Hemmings, Deputy Clerk. Davies stared at the slip. He did not touch it. His confidence for the first time visibly cracked. He looked from the slip to James's face. The room went quiet.
Peterson, the manager, leaned forward to look at the second piece of paper. He recognized the name. Dot Hemmings had been a deputy clerk for 40 years. She had retired a decade ago. She was famous for her meticulous records. If she signed it, it happened. Davies recovered quickly, but a flush had risen on his neck. This is also interesting, but it doesn't change the fact that the filing does not appear in the current digital index. They didn't digitize everything from back then, James said. You have to look in the old books, basement of the courthouse, Liber 412, page 88. The specificity was devastating. It was the kind of detail you couldn't invent. It was the kind of detail that could only come from having gone and looked. Davies was now completely off balance. His arguments were failing. He tried a third and final approach, the appeal to pragmatism. He softened his tone, leaned forward and folded his hands. He tried to look like a partner, a problem solver. Look, Mr. Croft, James.
Clearly, there's been a breakdown in historical record keeping. A lot of things fell through the cracks during those old mergers. I'm willing to concede that. But we still have a situation here, a messy one. Going to court would be expensive for everyone, time-consuming. So let's be practical. He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. To resolve this, to clear the bank's books and give you a clean, modern, indisputable digital title, we are prepared to offer a significant compromise. We will forgive 75% of the outstanding balance. We can settle this entire matter today for $10,000. No more letters, no more meetings. We clear the file, you get your title, we all move on. It was his last best offer. It was generous from his perspective. It was a way for the bank to cut its losses and avoid the embarrassment of a deeper investigation. It was a way for the old man to make his problem go away for a fraction of the cost.
He expected relief. He expected gratitude. He expected a handshake. James Croft looked at him. I don't owe 10,000. Silence. It was not an empty silence. It was a heavy, weighted thing. Davy sat back in his chair. He had played his last card. He had offered a legal argument, a procedural argument, and a financial compromise. Each had been met with a quiet, immovable object. He looked at the branch manager, Peterson, who was now studiously avoiding his gaze, looking instead at the grain of the mahogany table. Peterson was a local man. He knew this was over. He knew what was coming next, even if the young lawyer from the city did not. Peterson was the one who broke the silence. Mark, he said, his voice hesitant, maybe we should call someone. From the archives, downtown. Davy shot him a sharp, irritated look. It was a breach of protocol. It was an admission of weakness in front of the opposition. But he was out of ideas. His folder was full of digital printouts and legal theories. The man across the table had 2 pieces of 50-year-old paper that had just dismantled his entire case. To continue arguing would be to look foolish. To refuse to investigate further would look like malpractice. He sighed, a quiet exhalation of defeat. Fine, he said, waving a hand. Call your archivist. Peterson seemed relieved. He picked up the phone on the credenza and dialed an internal number. He spoke in a low voice. Yes, it's Bill Peterson at the Munro branch. Is Mrs. Gable available? Yes, I'll hold. Davies drummed his fingers on the table. He refused to look at James Croft. James, for his part, sat perfectly still. He had done his part. He had presented the evidence. Now we wait, however long it takes. 10 minutes later, a woman appeared at the door. She was in her late 60s, with short grey hair and glasses on a chain around her neck. She wore a simple cardigan and sensible shoes. She was the antithesis of the polished corporate world Davies inhabited. This was Mrs. Gable. She had been with the bank in its various incarnations for 51 years. She started as a teller at the People's Trust of Monroe County in 1971. Peterson stood up. Thank you for coming, Eleanor. She nodded, her expression neutral. She looked at the men in the room, her eyes lingering for a moment on James Croft. There was a flicker of recognition, but she said nothing. Davies explained the situation in clipped professional tones. He framed it as a discrepancy in the historical record. He gestured to the two pieces of paper on the table. Mrs. Gable walked over. She did not pick them up at first. She leaned over, peering through her glasses. She looked at the main receipt first. That's Arthur Abernathy's signature, she said, her voice soft but clear. He always made his A's like that. And that's the official stamp. We kept it in the top right drawer of the main vault. Then she looked at the county clerk's slip. Dot Hemmings, of course. She was a stickler. She wouldn't sign a receipt unless she saw the filing with her own eyes. She straightened up. She looked at Davies. What was the loan number? Davies told her. 774-B. Mrs. Gable walked over to a computer terminal in the corner of the room. It was a modern machine, but she ignored the mouse. Her fingers moved over the keyboard with an old, practiced rhythm. She wasn't using the bank's modern graphical interface. She had typed in a command line prompt, a green cursor blinking on the black screen, a direct portal to the old mainframe archives. She typed for a moment. She squinted at the screen. The digital migration in '94 was a mess, she said to no one in particular. They hired a third-party company. They scanned the active ledgers but only spot-checked the dormant files. Anything marked satisfied before 1980 was supposed to be archived to microfiche, not migrated. Looks like they missed one. She typed another command. A new screen of text appeared. Ah, she said, here it is. Loan 774-B, John T. Croft. Final payment received October 12, 1972. Account closed. Lien release filed with Monroe County October 13, 1972. Microfiche archive reference M72-4118. She turned from the terminal. She looked directly at Davies. The loan was satisfied. The record is clear. That ended it. The attorney, Mr. Davies, did not respond for a long moment. The confident architecture of his case, built on the bedrock of digital certainty, had just been demolished by a woman in a cardigan and a 50-year-old piece of paper. The flush on his neck deepened. He was a man who operated on procedure, on a clear chain of command. The procedure had failed him. He looked at the computer screen, then at Mrs. Gable, then at the two slips of paper on the table. They looked different now. They were no longer artifacts, they were facts. He cleared his throat. He gathered his own papers, tapping them into a neat stack. The gesture was automatic, an attempt to impose order on a situation that had spiraled out of his control. He was reasserting his professionalism in the face of its complete collapse. Well, he said, his voice tight and formal,
It appears there has been a significant clerical error, a deep-level data migration error. He did not look at James Croft. He was speaking to the room, to the record. He was framing it not as a mistake in judgment, but as a technical glitch for which no one present was to blame. It was the careful, bloodless language of corporate liability. Mrs. Gable, thank you for your clarification. You will, of course, file a report and initiate the process to correct the master file and formally nullify this action. Mrs. Gable simply nodded. Of course. Davies then stood up.
He buttoned his suit jacket, a small, armoured gesture.
He finally turned his gaze to James. He attempted one of his professional smiles, but it didn't quite form. It was a strained grimace. Mr. Croft, on behalf of Consolidated Regional Bank, I want to offer our sincerest apologies for this inconvenience. We pride ourselves on accuracy, and we deeply regret the anxiety this error must have caused. We will, of course, ensure your record is corrected immediately, and a formal letter of apology will be sent from our corporate office. The apology was correct. It was professional. It was also completely empty. It was a line in a script delivered to close a file. It had all the warmth of a digital receipt. Peterson, the branch manager, looked utterly miserable. He was the local face of this colossal, impersonal mistake. He mumbled his own apology, his eyes on the floor. James Croft listened to the words. He heard them, but they didn't seem to register. He had not come here for an apology.
He had come here for the truth. The truth had been established. The rest was just noise. He did not respond to the attorney's statement. He said nothing. He did not acknowledge the apology. He did not shake the hand that was vaguely offered in his direction. Instead, he reached across the table and picked up his 2 pieces of paper, the large receipt, the small slip from the county clerk. He refolded them with the same slow care he had used to unfold them. He placed them back inside his coat pocket, the pocket over his heart. Then he stood up. He picked up the cardboard tube that had been leaning against his chair all this time. Davies and Peterson watched him. They seemed to be expecting a final word, a piece of condemnation, a bitter remark, something to release the tension in the room. James Croft gave them nothing. No words, no hesitation, no argument. He turned and walked out of the conference room, his work boots making no sound on the thick carpet. He left the attorney and the manager standing in the quiet, sterile room with the ghost of a 50-year-old debt and the sudden, uncomfortable weight of their own institution's fallibility. The auction was over, done. The drive home was quiet. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, casting long shadows across the fields. The land was turning golden brown, ready for winter. James drove his old truck at a steady pace, his hands resting easily on the wheel. He didn't turn on the radio. He just listened to the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel as he turned onto his own road. He pulled up next to the barn and cut the engine. For a minute, he just sat there. He looked at the house his grandfather had built, the barn his father had raised, the fields they had all worked. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. A shadow that had been cast over it was now gone. He got out of the truck, taking the cardboard tube with him.
He walked not to the house, but to the fence line at the edge of the West 40, the parcel his father had bought. He leaned against a weathered cedar post that his father had set into the ground half a century ago. He popped the plastic cap off the end of the tube and slid out the contents. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't more evidence. It was a survey map, a new one, commissioned and paid for 3 weeks ago, the day after he got the letter from the bank. He'd hired the best surveyor in the county. The map showed the 40 acres, with every boundary line, every easement, every fence post marked with modern, digital precision. It was a perfect 21st century confirmation of the boundaries laid out in the original deed from 1952. He had brought it to the meeting just in case they had tried to argue about the land itself, about a boundary dispute, about some other forgotten claim. It was his father's lesson, taken to the next level. Have the paper, and then have the next piece of paper they haven't even thought to ask for yet.
He never needed to take it out of the tube. He rolled the map back up and put it away. He reached into his coat and took out the receipt one last time. He looked at the violet stamp. Paid in full. It was more than a financial statement. It was a declaration of independence. It was a promise kept. A circle closed. Some men collect problems. He collected patience. His wife Mary came out onto the porch. She didn't call out to him. She just stood there, watching. He saw her and gave a small, slow nod. She nodded back. That was all that was needed. He walked back toward the house, the setting sun at his back. He went inside to the kitchen and placed the old receipt and the clerk's slip back into the metal box, back into the folder with his father's papers. He closed the lid. Some things are planted for the next man. A promise made on a handshake can last a lifetime.
But when it's written on the back of a photograph, it can change a town. Next time, we'll meet a woman in Oregon, a forgotten picture, and the railroad that tried to erase it. Stay with us.